The 1995 dating program at the Great Pyramid of Giza recovered charcoal samples from gypsum mortar embedded in the pyramid's core. Several of those samples returned dates after the death of the king credited with building the pyramid, by decades, in some cases by more than a century. This is the inverse of the standard explanation for radiocarbon discrepancies. The standard explanation does not account for it. The dating work at Giza is not contested at the data level. The first systematic effort began in the early 1980s and produced its first major publication in 1987, when Herbert Haas and colleagues reported that the Old Kingdom carbon-14 dates ran on average 374 years older than the historical chronology of the kings who supposedly built the monuments. Willard Libby himself, the inventor of radiocarbon dating, had flagged a similar discrepancy for 3rd millennium Egypt in 1963. The 1984 to 1995 program collected more than 450 organic samples from Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom monuments. A team led by George Bonani at ETH Zurich, Mark Lehner at the Ancient Egypt Research Associates Project, and collaborators Herbert Haas, Zahi Hawass, Shaki Nakla, John Nolan, Robert Wenke, and Willie Wolfley published 269 of the resulting radiocarbon measurements in 2001 in volume 43 of the journal Radiocarbon, under the title Radiocarbon Dates of Old and Middle Kingdom Monuments in Egypt. The 1994 to 1995 phase had been funded by the David H. Koch Foundation. This is the most extensive chronometric study ever conducted on ancient Egyptian sites, and Hawass, at the time the director of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, was a named co-author. The dating method is mainstream. The institutional credentials are mainstream. The dated material is charcoal embedded in gypsum mortar. The pyramid's external casing stones, before they were stripped in later periods, were fitted with seams so tight that a hair will not pass between them. There is no room for mortar in the casing. But the pyramid's core stones, exposed at the surface today, are less tightly fitted. Some gaps are several centimeters wide, filled with gypsum mortar in which fragments of charcoal and reed are visible. The 1984 and 1995 teams sampled this organic material from cracks across all 3 pyramids and across multiple courses, from low in the structure to nearly the apex. The dating workflow is the same one used to date Middle Kingdom monuments, where the C14 results match the historical record. The results for the Old Kingdom pyramids do not match. The Haas-led 1980s effort had averaged 374 years older. The Bonani-led 1995 measurements ran 100 to 200 years older for the Old Kingdom as a whole. The Fourth Dynasty specifically, the dynasty that includes the 3 Giza pyramids, averaged 200 to 300 years older than expected. The dating program had concentrated 158 of its 269 measurements on 12 Fourth Dynasty sites. It had been most rigorous there. It was also most discrepant there. A First Dynasty tomb at North Saqqara, dated by the same team using the same method, returned a carbon-14 age that agreed with the historical record. Middle Kingdom monuments dated by the same team using the same method returned ages that agreed with the historical record. Only the Old Kingdom pyramids did not, and within the Old Kingdom, the Fourth Dynasty pyramids did not, most of all. The second result is the scatter. 25 charcoal samples from mortar in the Khafra pyramid produced radiocarbon ages that span 536 radiocarbon years. Khufu and Menkaure show comparable scatter on tighter readings and substantially wider scatter when outliers are included. Samples taken from the same mortar seam in the same wall sometimes return dates separated by several centuries. The Great Pyramid is supposed to have been constructed in roughly 20 years during the reign of Khufu. A construction project of that duration should not produce charcoal samples that scatter across the radiocarbon record. The third result is the inverted dates. Among the samples from the 76th course of Khufu's pyramid, 3 were collected from the same location. 2 of them date to decades after Khufu's reign. 1 dates to 163 years before Khufu. From the 145th course, 1 sample dates to roughly 70 years after Khufu's death. Khafra's 6th course preserves 5 samples from a single mortar seam that span a 400-year range, 2 of them after Khafra's death. The Menkaure pyramid contains samples that date to over 200 years after the king's reign and over 200 years before. These are not the worst outliers in the dataset. These are middle of the distribution results. The conventional explanation is the old wood problem. Radiocarbon dating reveals when a tree died, not when it was burned. In a dry climate, wood can sit on a landscape for centuries before it is collected for fuel. If pyramid builders used a mixture of fresh and aged firewood to heat gypsum for mortar, the charcoal fragments incorporated into the mortar would carry dates spread across the wood's effective lifetime. This is a real phenomenon. It accounts for some of the older outliers in the dataset. It cannot account for charcoal that dates to after the pharaoh's death. A tree growing in the year 2400 BC cannot have been burned to make mortar in the year 2580 BC. The wood did not yet exist. There is a structural problem with the mortar itself. Gypsum mortar is the wrong material for the application. Its compressive strength is well below that of lime mortar or hydraulic cement. It is sensitive to moisture and dehydrates under sustained heat, releasing structural water. No major load-bearing masonry tradition in the ancient Mediterranean used gypsum mortar in the core of a structure intended to last. The Romans did not. The Greeks did not. The masons who built the casing seams of the Great Pyramid to fits tighter than the human eye can resolve did not, in their casing work, use any mortar at all. The choice of gypsum for the core mortar, if that mortar was placed during the original construction, is inconsistent with the rest of the engineering on the same monument. In 2009, a research team revisited the 1995 raw data. Michael D. at the University of Oxford, Christopher Bronk Ramsey, the developer of the Oxcal calibration software, Andrew Shortland at Cranfield, Thomas Hyam at Oxford, and Joanne Rowland published their Reanalysis in Volume 51 of Radiocarbon under the title Reanalysis of the Chronological Discrepancies Obtained by the Old and Middle Kingdom Monuments Project. They applied Oxcal's outlier detection functionality to the 2001 dataset, identified outlying samples, and excluded them from the final calibration. 6 samples were excluded from the Khufu dataset. 5 were excluded from the Menkora dataset. The reanalysis announced that the recalibrated dates now showed much closer agreement with the conventional chronology. The compiled data was published. The individual recalibrated dates were not published in a form that would let an outside reader reconstruct which samples produced which dates. Outlier exclusion is a standard statistical operation. It is also a load-bearing operation in a dataset whose anomalies are the topic of inquiry. If the goal is to recover the chronology by removing samples that disagree with it, the recovered chronology is the chronology that was used to identify the samples. The conventional Egyptological response rests on 3 claims. The first is the old wood hypothesis, which explains older than expected samples by reuse of aged firewood. As discussed, this does not explain the younger than expected samples. The second is that radiocarbon calibration curves for the 3rd millennium BC are imperfect, with calibration plateaus that smear individual ages across a wider range. This is true and accounts for part of the scatter, but not for the systematic offset between Old Kingdom pyramid dates and the dates of other monuments measured by the same team using the same method. The third is that the gypsum mortar represents the original construction, and therefore the C14 ages reflect a real construction period of variable wood age fuel, which would require accepting that Old Kingdom construction took centuries, contradicting the standard chronology in a different direction. Each conventional explanation closes one anomaly and opens another. The 2009 reanalysis closed the chronology by excluding the samples that disagreed with it. This is a defensible statistical operation when the goal is to recover a known signal from a noisy dataset. It is a less defensible operation when the dataset's noise is itself the object of inquiry. The 11 excluded samples are precisely the samples that contain information about whatever process produced the anomaly. A separate reading is that the mortar is not original to the construction. If dynastic Egyptians performed maintenance and patching on pre-existing pyramid cores using gypsum mortar, a material they were producing from roughly 4000 BC, well before they were building large stone structures, the C14 ages would reflect the patching events, not the construction. This reading accounts for the older than expected average, the wide scatter, the younger than expected outliers that the old wood hypothesis cannot reach, and the same location different dates pattern, multiple patching episodes at the same eroded spot. It does not require any specific alternative builder hypothesis. It requires only that the mortar was placed later than the stones it fills. The Great Pyramid contains over 2 million stone blocks. The casing seams are tight to fractions of a millimeter. The core blocks are not. The dating evidence collected from the core fill across 2 systematic studies and 1 reanalysis does not converge on a construction window. It does not converge on a single occupation. It scatters across a millennium and inverts the direction of time. The most rigorous chronometric program ever applied to ancient Egypt produced its largest anomaly at the Fourth Dynasty. Conventional Egyptology has not produced a single explanation that closes all of the anomalies. The data are observable. The samples are cataloged. The reconciliation is not. If you want to support deeper research and found this journey as fascinating as we did, subscribe to Ancient Epochs for more.